Hello out there. Welcome to the No Shit Cast. I'm your host, Matt Frazier. Tonight's guest, Mr. Sensei Halim Rodriguez, joins me on the line. Founder of Holistic Mystics, co-founder of KRM Tactical. How you doing tonight?
I'm fantastic, and thanks for having me on tonight, Matt. It's a pleasure to speak to you, bud.
I'll tell you, so we have a friend in common, Sherfu. I think recommended that I talk to you. So shout out to Sherfu for helping connect us together. But you're a really interesting guy here. I definitely want to talk to you about both the things that you work in, the mystics stuff, and definitely the KRM tactical stuff. But can you kind of walk us through kind of how you got? What's your journey to getting here to this point where you're the founder of Holistic Mystics and the co-founder of KRM Tactical?
And first of all, let me also send a shout out over to Shifu. It's a great friend. I've known him online for a while. And your question is kind of the story that really makes it all fit. I started off as my father is the head master of one of the styles that I teach, and it's the style that I'm primarily studying, which is the foundation of what we do in KRM Tactical.
Okay.
So I grew up in a martial art family.
Okay. Now, is this a traditional Japanese martial art, or what's the I guess what would be the pedigree for it?
The name of the art is called Rinkyo Hendo, and it's a relatively new system, and it's kind of neat how it came about. There was a group of guys who were pretty high up instructors in different arts that kind of saw the same problem. Everything we do works as long as we're doing it within the same system. But when we train or do things with people outside of our system, it kind of starts to fall apart a little bit.
Right.
So they wanted to figure out, okay, what really works? Do we need to just adjust certain things? Is it just a stylistic expression of it? Try to get to the nuts and bolts of it. Over time, they found these universal principles that kind of have to be there for any system to really be reliable. And they kind of shifted focus to those, and over time it developed into its own curriculum, and that's in a nutshell that system.
Okay.
It's super brief.
So it's got fundamental roots from probably other functional martial arts.
Absolutely. The core martial arts that were used to develop it was Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, Kyokushinkai Karate, Shaolin Sukempo, and of course a couple other styles here and there that people that participated, including Judo. But those were the major focuses. The major players were representing those styles.
Yeah, and I did notice it, and I wanted to kind of expound on the grappling aspects and of it as well.
Yeah, the grappling aspect, of course, comes mainly from the Japanese Jiu-Jitsu and the Judo aspect of it. Of course, the Chinese system, like the Shaolin Sukempo, they call it Chinan. Chinan is kind of their grappling system, but it's a little bit more from a stand-up perspective. Although they have a little bit, their ground stuff is we don't really focus too much on the ground stuff from there as much as the Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. And the context of it all is very much oriented towards very practical, concept-driven things that are predictable outcome generators. So I know that if this, then that. That's kind of the format of the training.
And this is from a functional standpoint, right? Because this is a practical. You're not training people to go compete in grappling tournaments. Like this is for street self-defense stuff.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. So for the company, the KRM Tactical, we've got 5 modular programs that we focus on. And so typically when you speak to somebody and they don't know that much about the different martial arts, and you tell them that you're doing some some self-defense type of programs, the first thing they say is, oh, you mean Krav Maga? Or you say anything related to grappling is, oh, so you do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Right.
And it is what it is. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that's their level of familiarity.
Sure. Yeah, it's what they connect to. It's kind of interesting because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu really hasn't even been a thing for more than, 20 years?
Right.
So that people's mind automatically goes there is almost striking because still it's considered a bit of a niche, or there isn't a lot of people that participate in it, let's say, versus some of the other
Right.
martial arts still today. But okay, so this is how you guys fundamentally formed sort of this ideology. So now your focus is on like I seen that you do self-defense courses, and it looks like you do stuff
Yeah.
self-defense for women, and I'm guessing like law enforcement and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. So our 5 programs have these easy anagrams. So it's DART. So that's our dynamic action response training program. That program would be our version of what people normally think of when they ask that question. Oh, you mean Krav Maga? So it's that you're dealing with a sudden violent assault, which is very different than 2 people standing in front of each other with an agreed notion that we're going to fight for a prize. It's very different.
Right.
It happens unexpectedly. You are almost always taken by surprise, and it's usually an ambush attack, and it's very, very violent very quickly. So the way you address it has to be different. Our CART program is catch and release training. That's our grappling / counter grappling model that people typically ask, hey, oh, you mean Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? So the same thing, especially for men. See, if it's for a man, more often than not, you're going to be in a multiple attacker scenario, and 7 out of 10 fights involve a weapon. And so those realities, those statistical realities, change the playing field a little bit.
Sure.
And it's for that reason that that program is focused on, yes, the conventional grappling standards that need to be there for any grappling art to be effective, but with the eye on the reality that I'm probably going to get my teeth kicked in if I lay down for too long. I need to have an easy way up and an easy way out.
Right. No,
And then,
it makes perfect sense. It's the same reason why MMA was created for cage fighting,
right.
and pulled from multiple disciplines, and still does, right?
Absolutely.
A street or a live confrontation type situation would necessitate multiple disciplines to address it. So I get where
Yes.
you're coming from. It does. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and then we have our armed modules, the KITT and BITT. It's a knife intensive and baton intensive tactical training. So essentially, it's your edged weapons versus your impact weapons. And then our kind of flagship program, which is kind of a bit of a community outreach attempt from our point of view, is our WASP program, which is a women's assault survival program. And it's unique in the sense that we really focus on 2 very different but very scary realities. It's an abduction versus an assault. An assault could be they're trying to rob you or do what bad guys do to girls when they're alone, or it's an abduction. It's a snatch and grab. They're trying to yank you and throw you into the back of a moving van, and you're gone. So those are 2 very different realities that need to be approached very differently. And so that's our focus of the WASP program is that, with the understanding that according to the statistics, it's 89% of attacks on women are done by a single attacker. 90% of a single attacker. 89% of the time, there is no presence of a weapon whatsoever. So if you can start to address the situation and have a woman get used to carrying anything that they can use, or teach them how to use improvised weapons effectively in these kind of scenarios, the chances of them walking away from a scary situation like that go up drastically.
Yeah, there's not a, how do I say this, right? It doesn't take a tremendous amount of know-how and effort to increase your odds significantly, though, right? It's an attainable thing.
Absolutely. Obviously I won't say any names, but I know of a young lady who recently has been taking the classes, who unfortunately has had some pretty bad situations in the past, who once after they started training, there was a potential situation that had come up and they were able to successfully stop the attempt, and it didn't go as far as maybe they were expecting it to go. It's just a matter of now they know they walk around with more confidence. They walk with a purpose. They're looking around. They're more alert. So just the chances of them even being targeted as a victim has gone down. They address it much sooner with a lot more confidence, and those are really the things that keep them out from these kinds of scenarios in the first place.
Right.
And prevention's always better than trying to fight your way out.
Yeah, knowing how to read. I'm sure you guys probably focused in on like learning how to read a situation too, which is a skill. It's not something you're necessarily born with.
Yeah, it's a trainable skill though. That's the beauty, is once you know what to look for, and you can turn it into a game. We have this thing called Sting in our program, and the Sting of the Wasp. It's a clever little marketing thing, but honestly, what it is, it's an anagram that tells people how to make sure that they're covering all of the bases necessary for them to have that situational awareness to avoid a bad scenario.
Right.
And then we make a game out of it. A simple game. I call it the A game. So what you're doing is, and I didn't make this up. I actually heard it from a few different places, and we just adopted it. So the A game is the awareness game. If I'm sitting down in a restaurant, or I'm out somewhere in the movies or whatever, I'm hanging out with some friends, the A game is literally just, hey, without looking around and looking at everybody, how many people are working the floor? How many exits are there? Where are they? How many reflective surfaces can I look at to see who's behind me without turning around? Simple little things like that we can turn into a little game. But after you've done that for a couple of weeks, you realize that your situational awareness has gone through the roof.
Yeah, just look up would be, for most people, would be a huge improvement. No, so everybody's got their faces buried in their phones and stuff now, right, all the time.
I can't agree with you more, and I as a person who teaches self-defense, that has been for the longest time the bane of our, everything that we do is all about, man, you have to start paying attention. And now I guess this is an opportunity where I can mention something with one of our partners that has been a godsend of sorts. So there's a product that's out. It's called the Yellow Jacket. And what they've done is they've actually turned that problem into part of the solution. And so I could put a link out there where people can get a discount if they're interested in it. It's a great product. We actually went to Tampa where they're stationed, where they have their warehouse. And what it is, it's a smartphone case, and it's the world's strongest stun gun on the market. So if you're walking around and you have your phone in your hand, as long as you've got the wherewithal to turn on the device and have it prepared, if something starts to happen, if there is a sudden change of events and you need to use some kind of a tool for a self-defense tool, it's already in your hand. The big issue is, I can convince women to carry a firearm, a knife, or anything. The problem is, for women, I believe it's somewhere around about 85% of the attacks come from behind. And so if that's the case, they've already got their hands on you before you even get an opportunity to get to your tool.
Right.
So what are you going to do now?
So this is a brilliant idea, because what this is doing is this is putting that defense tool in the device. It's in their hand most often. It's kind of where they're coming from, right?
Absolutely. And that's really the biggest issue, because even if we're talking about guys, right, we're taking it outside of this woman's context. You got these guys that say, yeah, you know what, but I carry a gun, so I don't need it. Yeah, that's great. But again, we're talking about these ambush style type attacks that most of them happen within 3 feet. And if they happen within 3 feet, then realistically, do you think you're going to be able to pull out a firearm from a concealed carry position if they're wailing on you? And then as you're trying, which one of the weapons retention techniques are you really proficient at to make sure that you don't drop it or it doesn't get taken away from you?
Well, elaborate on that. Weapon retention techniques. Explain, kind of go into why that's significant.
Okay, so weapons retention is the idea that I need to be able to keep the weapon in my own hand, or at least keep the aggressor from being able to take it away from me. And this is something that is a big deal, especially for the law enforcement, because they're walking around with their firearm on their hip. And unfortunately, there's much larger than anybody would like, of course, a percentage of officers that are killed with their own weapon, simply because it gets wrestled away from them. And so that's what weapons retention is all about. Is how do I make sure that my weapon stays in my hand?
Right.
And so if you're an average guy and you're just out and about and something happens unexpectedly, I mean, you don't have the same regular training that a person that is a professional like a police officer would have. And
Right.
if these guys are unfortunately a certain percentage of them are being killed with their own weapon, then let's be honest, the chances of you also losing that weapon in that kind of a scenario is probably a little bit greater.
Yep. Yeah,
so by having something,
and you're talking about people that, when you talk about law enforcement, unfortunately, that get shot with their own weapon, you're talking about people that carry this daily and are trained to use it. So it's a big deal.
Absolutely.
I mean, if it can happen to them, imagine somebody that you're a concealed carry person and it's in your purse, and you never, you go to the range with it like once, twice a year, kind of thing, and expecting that to be a viable option. You need more in the bank than just a pistol. Is kind of what you're getting at, huh?
Absolutely. And the reality of it is also, if a person's not that used to managing whatever tool that they end up using, whether it's a knife, a gun, or anything like that, there is going to be a moment where there's probably going to be a hesitation of even using it. And understandably so. It's not in our normal nature to do something like that. And it's a little bit more so for women than it is for men. And I mean, if you close your eyes, or if you're hesitating, and then you don't want to hurt somebody, and next thing you know, it's being taken away from you.
Right.
And then they just don't care. Now that's where you become victimized with your own implement. At the very least, something like that yellow jacket as a stun gun gives you an opportunity to do a couple of things. As a woman, it packs enough of a punch to get a guy off of you so that you can get access to a more lethal type of self-defense implement. And as a guy, I mean, can you really think of a better kind of a weapons retention tool?
Right. Yeah, that's and to either gain access to a more lethal weapon or just run, get the time to get space and get separation from the situation too, with what's already in your hand. Yeah, that's I love this idea. That's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, it's great. We went and met the guys, and they actually did some filming with a European TV show called Galileo that plays out in Germany. So me and my partner went up there, and we actually did some of the actual tactical usage for that TV show. And it was funny because the way that we did it is I would show the lady who was the the host, and I would show her some simple ways that would be taught as far as a self-defense technique. And then she would try it, and of course she just saw it once or twice, but it's fresh in her mind, and then she would try it and struggle with it. And then we would demonstrate how a similar type of situation could be addressed using an implement, and like the yellow jacket. And so they got that on film, and it was great. But at the same time, the question has to be raised is, okay, just because you know something intellectually, does that really mean that you can actually do it? That takes training.
In a live situation is kind of what you're referring to there, right? Like, just because you know how to do something doesn't, when everything gets rolling, that you're going to remember, be able to what do you call that? recall that information when it's necessary. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
a big
definitely.
problem, right? There's a lot of people that train martial arts and stuff, and then but if you don't actually use it in a heavy training type situation, a lot of people,
Right.
their brain just kind of goes out the lunge.
Well, this is where we kind of have to start to. One of the things with KRM Tactical that we do is everything has to be backed by either a statistic or what we know about our own biology and how we respond to threat assessment and all that stuff. Everything has to be, I mean, it has to hold under pressure or you're just prepping yourself for failure. And that's not what we want to do. And
Right.
one of the issues is where we keep information in our brain when it's a memorized, especially when it's a complex mechanical movement. The region of your brain is in the same region of your brain where you store most of your other memorized information. Problem with that is if the danger of the scenario bypasses my comfort level,
Right.
I revert to the fight or flight response. It's the limbic system that takes over, which is really just an animalistic response type of play. All the things that I thought that I knew in my memory, it's not that I can't do them. It's just I'm no longer operating from the same region of the brain where that material is memorized. It doesn't work.
Okay.
So the way that we would train is you have to find some way to bridge your instinctive responses that come naturally under pressure and how to bridge those responses with those trained responses and have it concept driven. So I know I don't have to teach anybody that if someone's really too close to you, I want to get them away. We root that in your mind. No one has to teach that to you.
Right.
That's why instinctively you throw your hands out because you want to gain distance.
Right.
Now it's just a matter of how do we do that more effectively where you don't put yourself at risk.
Yep. Yeah, so you build this self defense system around what would be instinctual responses for people anyway.
Yes, and the beauty about that is now I don't have to know something is coming and prepare myself ahead of time before I'm effective.
Right.
What happens if I get startled, my flinch response is built into my training, my trained response.
So it's completely natural. And a lot about these type of situations, right, are about time. Um,
Right.
Buying yourself time to even think can be the difference between life and death. So having that space, it just gives you, if you can build in a couple seconds to catch your breath, kind of catch your wits, figure out what's going on. Those are all really, really critically important moments. So having that natural response also kind of gives you, like you said, that distance is time. I can give you a space from somebody where they're not doing damage to you necessarily right now, where your brain can kind of work and figure out what you're going to do next.
Absolutely. In Japanese, the name for the idea of distance is mai. And it's more than just the measure of distance itself. You see, timing is a intricate part of the ability to manage that distance. So if a certain distance between you and me is there, it seems as though it's equal. But if you're a little bit more agile and you're a little bit faster than I am,
Right.
you're going to be effective at a different range than I am. So even though we have the same distance between us, it doesn't mean that we have an equal benefit from that distance.
Right.
It's not equal at all. And so it's understanding how distance and how time actually plays a factor. And you're absolutely right. A lot of times buying myself a couple of seconds is all that I need. Because we all if you've been in martial arts long enough, you know there's always that person who's got that, what about this? And what about that?
Right. Yep.
And that's okay. I mean, we've all been there at some point. But the real answer to that is, okay, well, what if I have you in a pretzel and a knife to your throat with your feet tied to your ears? I mean, you know what? At a certain point, the answer really is just, then I guess I made a mistake before we got there.
Yeah. If you're there, a lot of shit's gone wrong before then. That's
Right.
where you're ending up.
Yeah. And that's really what we're talking about is how much sooner can I recognize that I'm in danger? That's what a lot of this training is really about. And I'm sure you can appreciate, because I know you're a BJJ practitioner, it's not always about what is my escape from a triangle choke or an arm bar or whatever it is that they're doing. It's how soon can I realize that's what they're going for in the first place.
Oh, big defense is huge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, the faster
And
you can
so,
recognize what someone's doing to you, the faster you can stuff it, you
yep.
know?
And so that's that universal principle that I was saying earlier, that the predecessors of the main parent art of where KRM Tactical comes from, that was one of those realizations is, okay, so if that ability to identify early, which is that situational awareness within the context of what we're doing, if the person who's consciously aware of that fact and who can do that more consistently
Mm-hmm.
is the person who's also more consistently successful in whatever it is that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So why not focus on that?
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, and playing into your instincts is, I mean, you either drill it until it is instinct. That's one
Mm-hmm.
option, or you just build off of instinctual response. But yeah, being able to recognize the situation is 2 seconds is all you. A lot can happen in 2 seconds
Right.
in a
And
live situation.
right, especially when you're dealing with something like certain chokes. And this is something that you guys see all the time in BJJ, but it's also something that we see all the time in violent assaults, especially with abduction attempts with women, where a guy yanks them up with a chokehold. You don't have 15 seconds to figure it out.
Nope.
It's just that's not going to happen. You've got 3 seconds at best before you're going to sleep.
Yep. Yeah,
So
especially
if you're not going to react within those 3 seconds, that's it. Whatever it is that you thought you know is irrelevant.
and yeah, once you're unconscious, it's over from there. There's no
Right.
there's no amount of training in the world that can make you wake up faster. It just
Nope.
is. Yeah,
Nope. At that point, you're at the mercy of the other guy.
it's a scary proposition, but again, it's not something that takes insurmountable amounts of training and effort to at least be hardened to those kinds of situations, right? It's not that
Correct.
it's so you, would you say that I feel that there's like this deficit in this kind of knowledge today with and I don't know what it's from, but with even like the average citizen, I feel like there's like this weird deficit between people just don't take the time to even study this kind of stuff anymore like they used to. Do you think
Right.
that? I mean, as a nation as a whole, um, I would guess probably less than 5% of women in this country have had any kind of hardened defense kind of training or anything like that at all, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's scary low, and the issue is, I think all of this really came about from around the time where martial arts became commercialized. Because if you were to look back in time, martial artists were considered to be very, very prestigious types of people. They were often um, they were consultants to, whether it be royalty or government. And you see this even as in relatively recent history, where in Japan, for example, that you would have someone like Mori Ueshiba, which was the creator of Aikido, was one of their major advisors on in the military. And so you have these people who were seen with a certain kind of prestige simply
Right.
because they understood it. And what ends up happening over time is now it's a business model, and you put a storefront location, and then you spend a lot of money on and a lot of time on marketing, and you're trying to get people through the door, and you're offering free classes and free this and free that and deals on this and deals on that. And really what it becomes is now the instructor is out there chasing for students to try to get into their schools so that they can pay the bills and make a living. And so that mentality, and that doesn't mean that the art is any more or any less efficient. I mean, there's some guys out there that are really talented that are doing the same thing.
Right.
But the perception from the consumer is now that it's a business product, it's a sports, it's a it's an extracurricular activity, it's no longer seen with the same level of respect as a viable way to preserve one's life.
And
so that's what's missing, in my opinion, anyway.
and that's kind of one of the things you were talking about, like in Japan and culturally in the United States, we really don't have that. It's sort of ad hoc. You sort of pick it. Like in other countries, they have like almost like cultural martial arts. They're taught it in
Yeah.
school. So that's what I mean. There's like this base level of this kind of education that like doesn't exist in the U.S. really compared to other countries.
I think some of that also has to do with how young as a nation we are. Being that the U.S. is as young as it is, our defensive culture is really kind of built around guns use. And so that's why you talk to people around the world, and it becomes almost a cultural joke, not in a disrespectful way, but it's kind of they think of a person from the United States as a gunslinging cowboy-ish. They think that they have a separate room just full of guns. That's kind of the stereotypical notion that they kind of get from us over here. So our defensive culture is built around firearms. And I think that has to do with the age in which we became a nation.
Yeah, and it has an influence sort of too on the approach to self defense because
It does.
The it's a more lethal ideology, isn't it? Overall, there's no you shoot somebody, you shoot somebody. That's
Exactly.
a very definite act, right? But from chokes to arm, I mean, there's chance for in hand to hand combat for you to take your boot off someone's throat, so to speak. So that
Right.
degree of subtlety is sort of missing.
One of my teachers years ago, they made a really, really good point. And they say at a certain point, if you're studying a martial art for self-defense and the person that you're studying from has a skill set in that kind of a mentality, you should be pretty effective pretty early. You should be learning things that could stop a violent assault very quickly, decisively, pretty early on. It shouldn't take me 5 years to get effective. There's a
Right.
problem there.
Yep.
Really what it is once you've become effective, you continue to explore how to be effective in different scenarios, but there's a certain point where your training turns around, and what you're really doing is you're training to be able to, it's almost an act of compassion, because if I'm really good and someone tries to come after me, I get to choose at what level of violence I need to respond.
Right. Right. And you have and like you when you have that training, you have degrees of choice. It doesn't have
Yes.
to just be a lethal choice every single time.
Right. Well, I would submit there's a saying, and I can't remember where I heard it first, but the saying is only a warrior truly chooses peace. Everyone else is condemned to it. And the idea behind that is, if I am not skilled, my only two options are three options is to carry a tool like a firearm that is an all or nothing tool.
Right.
Or that's one choice. The second choice would be choose to fight if I don't have a tool, choose to fight, and just be subjected to severe injury or run away. So no one's really going to choose severe injury if I'm pretty certain that's going to be the outcome.
Right.
That's where you have people submit to situations. So what that means is you are not choosing to avoid a fight because it's truly what you think is best. You're choosing not to fight because it's a survival instinct. If you chose to fight, you would get severely injured and possibly die. That's not really a choice, is it?
No. No.
So then if I have training, now I have the ability to choose.
Yep.
And that's what that's all about.
Yeah, that's one of the things that interested me early on when I first started looking into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was, I'm like everybody else. I found the Gracies first,
Mm-hmm.
but was that there's a compassion piece to it. because
Yes.
up to and including taking somebody's life. There's degrees with which it can be applied,
Right.
and then the aspect of which you actually train it hard. So
Right.
when it comes time, if it ever, because most people never apply it, right? But
Right.
if it ever comes time, is that you're familiar with the speed and the velocities and the ferociousness which with this is going to take place, way more
Absolutely.
than somebody who hasn't trained it at speed. So those were kind of the pieces of it. So that's sort of what, fundamentally speaking, that's kind of what you guys are building here too. Is you
Yep.
built something that you legitimately train. Okay, so this isn't, and I don't want to pick on the martial arts that just do katas and stuff like that, because all of that is important. So I'm not belittling that, but there's something different about when you collide with somebody at high speed, that
Yeah. Yeah,
having that
definitely.
is a big deal. Having that experience is having someone smash you on the ground, I think, is so vitally important, because you start to
Right.
realize, oh, wait a minute, maybe I'm not in as much trouble as I think I am, and you get time to think.
Right. Well, it's like Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah, boy,
So,
ain't that true?
yeah. And I think what happens is you have to, from a self-defense scenario, the worst time to realize that you are insufficiently prepared because your training was inadequate to the reality of your scenario is when you have a guy with a knife really coming at you.
Right.
That's the worst time to realize, oh, I'm not as ready as I thought I was.
Yeah. And your brain packs a lunch.
Yeah,
Sorry, we're not
exactly.
here
I'm
right
out.
now.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens. All the training goes out the window, and hands fly out, and they just
Yep.
do their best to grab onto something.
Yep. Yeah, yeah. It was funny because we just had a most recent event here. Something that of note to me was this last Ultimate Fighting Championship event, where it degraded into a barroom brawl. Okay,
Yeah,
and one of the things I found striking about that was when I was watching these guys was how their form turned into just jumping and swinging like like
yep,
haymakers, swings, and stuff. And these are all trained fighters. But
yeah,
I don't want to say it degenerated their form and stuff, but it really became basic in that moment. I mean, I'm
yeah.
sure every one of these guys could, if they connected, would just drop you like a bad habit. But like all of that form kind of disappeared, and it turned into like a brawl with all of these guys.
It really does. It did, and the lesson I think to really take from that, and again, I'm not belittling any one of those guys. They put an incredible amount of time and effort into developing the skills that they have. Um, but the reality is the reality, and you can see it, and it is what it is. These are guys that train. They're professionals. They're training
Right.
every single day.
Yep.
And the fact that it's the mentality, if I'm facing the person, this is a match and this is what I need to look out for, then I have to, all of that is in place in that situation. But contextually, they're just thinking in an emotional state where they allow their rage to get the better of them, and then all techniques go out the window.
Yeah. It-
Well, what do you think would happen on the street if that's the same reaction? And then you have a guy who just picks up a piece of wood. There was a piece of video footage that was going around. I don't remember how long ago it was, but there was a guy who was a champion, a previous champion of I want to say Bellator. It was one of the major networks of MMA. The guy was if you're a champion, you have developed your skill within that craft to be a formidable person. I think that's fair to say.
right.
It was him and one other person at a gas station that got into a fist fight with these random guys. One of these guys picks up a 2x4, knocks him in the head unconscious, and then he was, I don't know how long, in a coma in the hospital. It just goes to show a person with a high level of training, if you're unable to maintain, or if your training does not prepare you for the reality of the street, you psychologically won't make the connection between your training and the scenario. That training just won't show up for the show.
Well,
That's just what it boils down to.
I'll tell you this, buddy. I it puts my ego in check, and what I mean by that, so there's another piece to this too from training.
Hmm.
Is you start to realize how destructive a human being can actually be when they want to be. And it takes the
Yes.
piss out of those little tiny arguments that don't need to escalate into anything violent. You know what I mean? Or someone cutting you
Right.
off in traffic, or you're just like, whatever. You know, for me, it's been a huge equalizer that way, where I just don't get quite as upset about stuff anymore. Not so. I'm definitely a respecter of what a human being can do with just their hands, let alone
Yeah.
okay, a knife, a gun, any of these other situations. So for me, it's from that aspect, training has just been something that makes me want to calm everything down. Like I don't get
Yeah.
pissed at people. It's unnecessary.
You just answered that age-old question that you get from usually the soccer moms and the people who don't know anything about martial arts is, why would I want to expose my children to violence? And they don't understand what you just said is exactly why martial arts is so effective for people. It actually has the other effect than people would think. When you get involved in martial arts, you learn to respect. So in one case, and I'll put it in the context of BJJ because that's what you're most familiar with, is you go in there and you're this tough guy and you pair up with someone who's probably half your size, and then very calmly, very respectfully puts you in the most painful positions that you can ever consider, and then lets you go at will, and then does it over and over again until you say, I'm done.
Oh yeah, wait.
And then shakes your hand.
Have a 14-year-old kid do it to you
Yes. Yeah.
at will, and you're like, okay, wait a minute. Yeah, it's frightening when someone gets a hold of you that knows what they're doing.
Right. And then what happens is you start to realize something that escapes a lot of people that don't have training. Anger does not equal competency.
And
It
rage
does
doesn't
not
equal
make you strong.
success either. That's for sure.
Exactly. And so when a person can do these things and you see them not even flinch emotionally, they're completely unaffected, you start to realize that anger is not strength. Violence is not strength. Strength is something in itself. When you find out what that is, you can address violence, you can address anger, you can address any scenario and not be moved because you found a strength that doesn't rely on that stuff.
Yeah.
Then you can deal with those things. Otherwise, you're only reacting.
Oh, and the best part is when you get those creepy dudes that not only are they just not even breaking a sweat, but they're smiling at you the entire time. Right?
Oh yeah,
Like
no. You got to see the giggler.
and you just in your head you're going, there's just this whole other level that I didn't even know existed. Like
Right.
there's levels of competency here for the guys for any of this stuff. I'm sure, like you guys
Yep.
especially, when you pursue this, like you said, you want to do what? Are you sure?
Yeah.
kind of attitude, because I don't think that's going to work out for you very good, Scooter. That's a whole different attitude. And I don't really feel like getting my clothes all tore up right now. So,
Right.
that's a whole nother piece to it too.
Well, you got to think to yourself, you don't know what the other guy knows. You don't know what the other guy has.
Right.
So, is the fact that they sat down too close and spilled something on me really worth one of us possibly dying over, and then the court battle, and then the reality that somebody now is hurt because someone is, whether one of us died or not, there's an injury or there's other
Right.
people. Is all of that worth a spilled drink? I
Right.
mean, at a certain point, we got to grow up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it does. It gives you that perspective when you start doing these types of when you do martial arts, or if you do any kind of self-defense training. It really does kind of give you that perspective that, I don't think this is necessarily worth getting upset about. So I
Yeah.
personally, I live a much happier, peaceful existence because
Right.
I'm not really looking to be offended by anybody ever. It's not even in my programming anymore.
Well, when you start to realize how it's not really you that can be offended. I mean, they don't know you,
Right.
right? So
Right.
all they're saying is something to get an emotional reaction out of you because they're upset, and that's what people do when they're upset.
Right.
And then what is there about you that they know that they could possibly actually offend you?
Yeah.
They can't. It's really just an ego thing. Oh, how dare you yell at
Yep.
me? How
That's
dare
it.
you make a scene?
Yeah. That's it. I had a situation the other day where somebody was telling me they were upset because somebody took a dime out of the penny jar at the gas station,
Right.
bought something, but it wasn't, but wanted the change back. It was like 7 cents, and they were raging about this. I'm like, really? You're that mad about 7 cents? Because that's what it looked like to me. And they're like, oh, you know, what are you talking
Yeah.
about right now? Okay, so I get this sense that here's a segue for you. Okay, that
Yeah.
that this which preceded what was it the personal alchemy preceded the martial art, or was that in light or become because of your study of martial arts? Or has it just been sort of the same journey together the whole time?
No, martial arts came first for me.
Okay.
So I was learning, of course, through my father. My uncle were both instructors before I was even born. So I've been training, and some of the practices that we would do are really based on, training from a deficit. You standing in front of somebody and doing sparring sessions is great practice, but at a certain point you have to realize that that's not how things happen. So,
Right.
what we would do is just kind of practice in a way where you're just kind of walking around, everybody walking back and forth between each other, and at random somebody picks somebody else and just does something, whether it pushes, pick you up and drop you, or throw a kick. I don't know. It's anything.
Right.
And so now we have to deal with these sudden and drastic changes coming from any person. And we were doing those drills on a pretty regular basis. There was a point where I caught myself feeling as though, and of course I questioned whether it was true or not, but I was feeling as though my body was reacting and responding to things that I wasn't seeing. And that raised questions for me. And I started to ask my father, like, hey, what do I do with this? Can I do something to make this more common? Is this a skill that I can actually develop? Or what is this? And his style of teaching was very much, well, if you want to figure out what the masters really did, you go study what they studied. You do what they did.
Right.
So I would read up on all of these big names in the martial arts historically, and some of the works that were written by their hand, and what either plainly and overtly or hidden in allegory in some sense, they all kind of hinted that the real source of higher level skill set wasn't really in the physical. It was in something else that was internal. And that piqued my interest, because then I was like, okay, if this is a commonality, if they're all saying the same thing, there's got to be something to it. And that's what led me to the internal practices. And I started with all kinds of stuff. I did different types of yoga. I did meditation. I started getting involved into some esoteric traditions, and what I espouse now is this idea of internal alchemy. Although I have formal training in different stuff, the idea of internal alchemy is that common thread.
Yep.
It's either hidden or described overtly, but everybody is trying to make an internal transformation of consciousness. And that's really what it's all about. And that's that same thing that I saw that the predecessors of that developed martial art that I was studying did in the physical sense. There's these principles that exist in every system. Focus on that. And here I'm finding the same thing for the internal, that there's these sets of principles, and there's this hidden mechanism that we can call internal alchemy that's present in all of them. So why not focus on that?
Yeah. You used a really good phrase there, common thread.
Yeah, yeah. If it exists everywhere that does this kind of a thing, then that's probably the most effective thing to focus on.
Well,
I mean, that's just the basis of it.
and this is what I was so excited to talk to you about this, especially after I kind of went through the Facebook page and stuff like that, because I feel the same way. I feel that there's a convergence. And it's hard to explain, but there seems to be success has a methodology,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you learn how to play a musical instrument at any level, if you learn how to do anything at any level, significant level, you kind of learn that methodology, do you not?
Yeah,
And then you
yeah.
can just reapply that. over and over and over again to multiple things. So I think that's kind of, is that kind of where you're pulling from, is that you've looked through and said, look, there's a common thread through all of these things, and here's sort of what it looks like. Let's focus on that and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think the practicality of being a martial artist, especially with the kind of training I was fortunate enough to receive, although growing up, we're people. So I would indulge in, hey, we could do this and we could do that, and eventually come back to realize, okay, that was enough of that silliness. Let's get back to, this. So we have to allow ourselves the occasional exploration phase, but that's how we grow, isn't it? By exploring.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it came to the internal stuff, the practicality of the martial artist says this, at least in the way we trained. You get these guys that say, I could this, I could that. If I did this, it would be lethal. If I did that, it would do this, it would do that. That's all great in theory. Everyone's a legend in their own mind, but let's see if it's true.
Right.
I'm going to throw a punch, and all the coulda, shoulda, wouldas go out the window if you can't stop me from punching you in the nose.
Right.
At a certain point, you have to accept the obvious, that it's fantasy if you can't just prevent the basic.
Yep.
And so that same practicality was taken to the internal practices. I was much less interested in the beliefs and the philosophies of wherever these practices were coming from, as I was with the actual methodologies that were designed to take you to the experience they were talking about. And that's what the idea of alchemy really is. It's just, if it's a science, then I know that if I do this, this is going to be the result. And that's what I was really in search of finding, is how do I get these results?
Right.
Because that's exactly what we do in the martial arts, isn't it?
Yeah, but you made a very good point. You said the word science. So you're talking about not only results, but repeatable results.
Yes.
Something that you can do over and over again and still get the results. The same results.
And what happens with that is all these things that seem to have a presence but don't really have connections, and they seem out of place. When you put it all in context of a scientific method, all of a sudden they all start to find their place.
Right.
Just like in the martial arts, you had made mention of the forms, the katas.
Mm-hmm.
There are movements that, unfortunately, over time, much of it has been completely lost in terms of how to actually apply it. So what you have is a bunch of people trying to make their best effort to make it applicable in a real scenario.
Right.
There's other arts that do have certain movements that resemble katas, but those movements are very well maintained as far as their application in combat. And when there is that connection that's well understood, then you realize that all this is it's your. Okay, so I can only speak from the arts that I've practiced, but here's a little tip. Most of the movements in katas are meant to be broken apart into many different segments, and they're really all about entries. They're not about techniques and moves. It's about entries.
Okay.
So how do I go from an outside range to an inside range where I can apply whatever techniques? So how do I approach my opponent without getting my teeth knocked out of my mouth or anything like that?
Sure.
That's really what those things are primarily focused on.
Yep.
And so once we have that understanding, we can approach our training appropriately in a way that now, under pressure, let's do sparring, and I'm just going to focus on doing this entry.
Right.
And see and make that work. And then what I do afterwards is irrelevant. It's just really training the entry. And so doing the same thing with the internal is you start to realize there's a lot of things, there's a lot of symbolic and allegorical speak, and there's a lot of things that seem not to make sense. It seems as though it's just an outward kind of discussion of things that are a belief.
Right.
However, when you start to understand what the symbols are actually pointing at, and you understand the science behind it, you start to do the practice, and now all of a sudden these things start coming together as to, oh, that's why.
Yep.
And then you pair it up with biology and you say, oh, well, you know what? There's actually a basis of understanding that we can look at in our biology as to why this works.
Sure. There's a weird sort of harmoniousness that you achieve between. So speaking from the context of physical fitness, let's say, from just that
Right.
vertical, all right.
Yeah.
Because to pursue the martial art for true physical fitness is going to involve diet. It's going to involve practice and repetition. Like there's all these other, and when you get all of those pieces in harmony, is when the real progress happens. Right?
Yes.
You follow me? So there's I don't know what you would
Absolutely.
call that, a zen to that, but it's really important.
Right. Well, this is where we start to realize that there's a difference between doing an activity and living a lifestyle. And so if you want to make a change that reaches the depth of your entire life, well, then you need to use it as a lifestyle, not just an activity.
Right.
Because I'm only going to allow something to impact me at the level that I engage the activity. That's common sense.
Sure.
It's just like my interactions with people. If I'm only going to speak to somebody on a superficial level and only talk about the weather and whatever happened on whatever show they like to watch or whatever it is that we know that they're going to be able to speak about, and then that's it. We barely know each other as people. We haven't really discussed anything beyond whatever socially presented. But now if you sit in front of a person and you really start to speak about what their interests are, what their ambitions are, what their dreams are, what their fears are, all of these things, and now all of a sudden we're talking about a deep level of understanding of that person, well, you've probably made a friend for life at that point.
Oh, definitely. There's something to the relationships that get built when you're training, right? I mean, there's something
Oh,
to
yeah.
about that struggle with somebody else. We call it mat therapy, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
man, you meet a quality of individual. Because some people come, you see this, I'm sure. You get like there's a flow of people that come in and go right back out,
Yep.
and then there's the ones that stick. But if you want to
Right.
surround yourself with quality minded people that really kind of get it and be influenced by them, go to a jiu-jitsu gym, go to a self-defense club, go be with those people, and
Right.
you will find a collection of people with just all this really brilliant mindset of achievement and understanding what hard work and diligence and things really mean. It's
Yeah.
it's the only place you can find it.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you, and I try to be as logical and rational as I can be. So I usually preface statements like what I'm about to make with, of course, I'm a little bit biased because I grew up as a martial artist. I
Right.
understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that my judgment here is probably a little one-sided because it's what I truly enjoy and how I identify myself as a person. However, I don't think I've ever met people who have had stronger bonds with their friends outside of martial artists.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason of why is because as martial artists, when you're training with each other, especially, there is a certain level of honesty that you have that's hard to duplicate anywhere else because you really have no choice.
Yeah.
Speaking has no value in that because it's where you are struggling is blatantly obvious. And now what's happening is it's a collective effort. We are helping each other. I would be helping you overcome that difficulty by training and putting you in these difficult
Right.
situations. And so then there's a level of trust that gets built and a level of acceptance and saying, hey, you know what? You're going to put me in these really bad situations, but I know it's because you're trying to help me so that I can get better.
Yep.
And then when we're doing that to each other, I mean, is there a better basis for trust and friendship?
Well, and you nailed it when I think the word there is honesty, because it don't
Right.
matter how big your house is, what car you arrived in. It don't matter how much money you got in your bank account, or how good, like you said, if you're a good salesperson, whatever. When you put it on the mats, It's go time, right? There's no you know, it's you either can or you can't. And then to have that backup, like you said, of those people that can see you at your that frail portion of yourself and say, "Oh, no, we can help you fix that." You know, and that's
Right.
what
And
they're
see,
there
this is where,
for.
yeah, absolutely. And this is where you get to see and know a person's character
Mm.
beyond what they say, because everyone puts on a good show when they think someone's looking.
Yeah.
But if you really want to get a good judge of someone's character, is you put them in difficult situations like you would in a martial art. I mean, if you're starting to do certain techniques, you're choking each other out, you're tapping each other out. If in a self-defense situation, we do trials where we do everything by statistics. We do a very basic one and an entry level on how we do things on one of our programs is you stand in front of each other. There's a minute drill. In that minute, the person is throwing as quickly as they can, obviously not anywhere near full power, but they're just trying to make contact.
Right.
And they've got a minute to make contact. Your job is only to keep them from making contact. You can't hit them back. You're not trying to throw them. You're just trying not to get hit for a minute. And so we arrive at a certain statistical number. And then we go through all of our training and then we repeat that same drill at the end. Normally, on average, we've actually run this enough times that we have an average. Most of the people, whether they have training or not, hide behind all of their offensive techniques and to make up for weaknesses in their ability to avoid getting hit.
Yep.
So most of them are at about 20 to 30% success rate of not being able to get hit with training.
Okay.
And by the time they're done, just because we do things from that instinctive response and everything is very, very simplified and done in a way that it's reliable under pressure. That's the main thing, is as the pressure rises, you begin to trust these things even more. By the time they're done, they're around 90% success rate. And I'm talking about one day of training.
Yeah. Yeah, that's and
You
that
know,
well that goes back to that original point when we started too, was how there isn't it doesn't take a tremendous amount of effort necessarily and know-how to get to a point where you're a fairly hardened individual, right? You just got to do it.
well, that also has to do with if you're training with people who know what you need.
Definitely a right. You got to be talking to the right people. I'm a big fan of
Right.
McDojo Life. I don't know if you are or not, but I watch me some
Yes.
McDojo Life and laugh.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Sometimes people buy into their own fantasy. This is just one of those things where your training should keep you honest as an instructor as well. And I'm real big on that, where I know that I need to continuously train to improve.
Right.
There's always something, even if we're doing some drills and training, or even if it's something where I'm in a fight, even if for you that you're doing jujitsu and you're in a match, you out of 100 matches, even if you won all 100 of those matches, I promise you, in every single one of those matches, there are moments that you lost.
Sure.
So those moments that you lost should be the focus of your training.
Yeah. Right.
And if you do that, you will always improve and it keeps you honest. But if you're not training in a way to point those things out in yourself, nothing in life is stagnant. The only thing that does not change is what's dead. And not even that, because those things decompose. The only thing that doesn't change is change.
Right.
So if I'm not getting better, I'm getting
I'm
worse.
getting worse. I'm losing ground if you're not taking ground, you're sliding. Right.
That's it. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I may not like it, but if I am not getting better, I am getting worse. And so you'll see this with these McDojo types where they're building this legend of what they once were.
Yeah.
And as more time goes, that legend is more, what can I say? I mean, it's
Sensationalized.
more,
Yeah.
yes, it's
Yeah.
more sensationalized. And then there's less training that allows the student to really put pressure on the instructor to see if that's even anywhere true.
Right.
They insulate themselves by distance and say, well, let me show you what my student can do. Okay, that's great, but you can't even see your toes, much less touch your toes. I'd be hard pressed to think that you're going to be able to do half of the stuff that you're telling me that you can do.
Yeah.
And it is what it is. It is what it is. It's not like I'm saying these guys should this or should that. It is what it is. You know what? Some people just like to have their ego stroked. And if that's your gig, a McDojo's for you.
Yeah.
But if you want to see something, if you want to actually do something and find out who you really are and really develop something that can actually save your life, you're going to want to find people who are of like mind.
Yeah. No, definitely. I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. It's and again, it's such a cathartic experience if you can get through it. So a lot of people, I think they get scared of their own invulnerability or their own vulnerability, and they say, "Man,
Right.
I'm done with this," and they're gone usually pretty quick.
Yeah, and of course, there's always more than one reason. I've seen a lot of places where they have good guys. I mean, good practitioners of whatever art they're doing, but it's such a niche group of people. Like they've got their own clique, and you've got to prove that you're worth even being in that clique.
Yep.
And then they make it really difficult for you to be around. And if you don't stick through, it's like a hazing. If you don't stick through it all, they don't open up to you. And I think that's the wrong approach.
Sure.
The people who are meant to be will they're going to select themselves for either participation or elimination. That should be their choice.
Yep.
You just do the work, you do the training, and you allow the training to make the difference. And this is where, going back to the internal stuff, the alchemy, martial arts is very much a physicalized form of alchemy. We're changing a person's physique, we're changing a person's psychology, we're changing a person's emotional stability, their
Yep.
moral compass.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. I mean, it's not to truly embrace it. There has to be though, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're sort of all
Yeah.
in on this. Was that famous line from the Karate Kid? Karate do guess so.
Yes.
But
And it's a hard thing for people to do at first, but I promise you, if you had the courage for 1 hour, and just have the courage for 1 hour to put yourself in a vulnerable scenario enough to just be a student. Don't be that guy who walks into a place and tries to tell the teacher all the things that you thought you know. Oh, so and so taught me this. Oh, I do that too, and this, and I've learned that and this. That's great. You don't go to a school to tell someone else how much you know. You go to a
right.
school to learn. So
Yep.
be vulnerable enough to just absorb as much as you can. And by the end of that class, you're going to know if it's good for you or not. And if it's not, it may just be a matter of trying another place.
Sure.
That's why we have 5 different disciplines at KRM Tactical. They address 5 specific situations, but at the same time, it ideally you would want to have a well-rounded education.
Okay.
However, there's people out there that have absolutely no interest in weapons whatsoever. On the other hand, there's those guys out there who have absolutely no interest in grappling whatsoever.
Right.
And usually what you'll find is the ones who don't have interest in grappling tend to be your knife guys. And the ones who really like weapons work, they're not always into the grappling.
Right.
It's just that's that mentality. Let me get a weapon, I'll defend myself with that.
Yep.
It would be better to be skilled at both, because you may end up in a situation where a guy just bulldozes you. I mean, you may be walking down a sidewalk and the guy just rushes you and knocks you down to the ground. That's great that you have a weapon in your pocket, but how are you going to get to it?
Right. Yeah, while they're on top of you, just beating the snot out of you. Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny when you talk about going into a class. If you don't find your tribe, try a different one. They're out there, sure, absolutely, and
That's
not
it.
because there's MMA bros, the smash and crash kind of guys, and I'm 46 when I started this adventure. I'm like, I'm not doing that. It's just not in the cards. But So yeah, there's a lot of different gyms now and places you can go, but the quality of people, man, is just second to none. Once you
It is.
find a good place that resonates. So you guys, with the like you said, you guys break your sort of curriculum up into different disciplines so that's not a marketing thing. That's a necessity thing. That's just because.
Yeah.
And that comes from
Yeah, it's definitely a
experience.
necessity. I'm sorry?
That comes from experience, from what you're seeing kind of come in as the need in the marketplace. So it's not necessarily a marketing thing. You're doing that specifically because there's niches that have different needs.
There's niches that have different needs, and I'll give you an example. My partner, the other co-founder of KRM Tactical, this is a guy who has extensive military background. The guy was pretty up there he was a sergeant ranger in the airborne, a sergeant major in the airborne rangers.
Okay.
And so the guy's been in war.
Okay.
Retired from that. Was a police officer for a long time. He now works. Excuse me. He now works with one of the largest departments in his state as the defensive tactics instructor.
Okay.
And there is a group of situations or levels that escalate.
Okay.
Some people will never be exposed to that. So, for example, the catch and release training is all about the grappling and also managing somebody. It's your hostile subject control.
Okay.
And so police officers, security guards, bodyguards, that niche of people, that's their bread and butter. That's what they need. They're not going to be your guy who's going to draw a knife every time they see somebody getting out of hand. It's just not what's going to happen.
That makes
On
sense.
the other hand, a woman who's becoming a victim of attack, it's going to be in their best interest to draw a knife, if they have one, as soon as possible.
Okay.
So it's the reality of the situation that changes. And so that's why we have these different disciplines, is to make sure that we address the possible professions that need a specific version of it. Because we have the DART module, which is our self-defense module, that does include quite a bit of the striking in any way possible, the elbows, the knees, and
Right.
all kinds of things. But you put that in the hands of a guy who's doing security, and for example, you get these security teams who manage high-end establishments, or even just your bouncer. I've done training courses for security teams in nightclubs, where the biggest issue that they had is, it seems like every time there's a patron who gets out of hand,
Right.
there's a bouncer who feels like it's time to throw hands, and now they've got problems with lawsuits. So we go in and we teach these programs on KITT, how to actually be effective with your subject control techniques, where you don't have to hit somebody and you can get them out of the establishment.
Right.
Now that they're equipped to do it properly, they're able to remove people without having to hit them. Everybody wins.
Yep. Yeah, and if you were like escorting, or if you were doing like a bodyguard type thing, the idea of standing and banging with someone would be counterproductive, because that doesn't protect the asset, right? It doesn't protect the person you're actually trying to protect. So you can't do that kind of stuff. So that's a whole different approach to how you would engage somebody, given the situation.
Yeah, unfortunately, if you're in a situation like that, we have to take in consideration. Well, first of all, you're probably on a team, unless it's just something,
Right.
that's not that big a deal. But you're probably in a team, and each person has their what it is that they're supposed to do. But either way, if I'm just going to stand there and bang with somebody, then I have no idea what's happening to the guy I'm supposed to be protecting.
Right.
I'm there wrestling with the guy on the floor, and I've got this guy. I've elbowed him, and he's turning blue because I've got him choked so hard. This guy will never think about doing that. And the guy I'm supposed to be protecting just got stabbed 25 times in 10 seconds. Well, good job, bud. You just failed what you were supposed to do.
Right. Completely counterproductive.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have to be aware of the reality of the situation that we're in. And that's why we have these different modules to allow enough of a broad spectrum where people can come in and get good training regardless of which one they do. It's complete within itself and in its own right. Yet, so if someone came in with a certain profession, they can take one or the other, but they can still take all if they wish, and it's obviously more rounded that way.
Sure.
So it's not a marketing thing. It really is just a matter of, we recognize that there's these different niches.
Right.
And these different niches have different requirements. And so this accounts for your strikers, it accounts for your grapplers, or the ones who have to control the situation without it hurting the other person. It accounts for your law enforcement, that is probably going to be your biggest crowd with the baton, right? And that's your impact weapon.
Yep.
And then you have your knife-centric stuff, which is a little bit more, it can be either self-defense, your individual person, but it can also be kind of your military crowd.
And this is pragmatic. I mean, because what you're basic. So here's what I see. I mean, a lot of times martial arts gets broken down into which one's best. And the answer to that question isn't which one's best. The answer to that question is which one's best for the situation. Is really what it boils down to. So you guys don't get trapped in that ideological sort of conundrum there. Because you say, well, it depends on what we're doing with it. And that's sort of designed into the structure of your institution from the ground up.
If I can, I'll share with you a funny story that happened years ago. And I think it illustrates that point pretty good. What happens a lot of times with people who have this, they have this preconceived idea of what something is supposed to be. And that's where these questions come up. Oh, which style is better, which this is better, which that is better, and not taking into consideration that the reality of the situation. So years and years ago, and I'm talking about like 15 years ago or more, there was a group of people who got together. It used to happen about every year or every 2 years down here where I live, where instructors in the local area would get together, and it was supposed to be, we just network and we chat and we try to, promote each other's events and see what else is going on and see if we can do things together. And more often than not, what would happen is somebody came in with their ego a little bit inflated, saying why they're so good and everybody should, really kind of follow what they're doing. It's unfortunate, but that's just kind of how it was. Not always, sometimes. Okay. So there was this guy who came in, and he was kind of new to the area, and I think he was just trying to make himself known. I just think he went around about it the wrong way. He was a Filipino knife practitioner. Great martial artist, can't take anything away from him. He was doing a lot of stuff and showing how these guys that were coming from other systems, he was trying to say how his knife system was superior to this, that, and the other, and that nobody can disarm. And if anyone tried to disarm, he can do this, that, and the other. And it was getting to the point where he was kind of losing control, and just kind of, he jumped on that bandwagon of I'm better and just took it.
Obnoxious.
Yeah. And so it got to the point where he's kind of almost issuing a challenge, and he's telling me, well, if anybody wants to try to see if they can disarm, I've got the training knife right here. Let's see if you can disarm, And so from a strategical standpoint, and this is kind of what the reason why I'm pointing this out is, he was kind of putting in everyone's mind a situation that, just by the standard of how he's setting it up, it is a losing scenario. He is saying that they cannot disarm him by taking the knife away from him. And so what he would do, he's showing all of this stuff, and if you try to grab this, so inevitably, if they were to try to disarm him, he's going to have the knife pulled back, the other hand's going to be in front, and he's going to do all kinds of stuff that's really, really not going to be conducive to somebody trying to disarm a knife. Okay. It's just, that's the situation, the reality of it. And so it got to a point where it got to a point where it was kind of, I kind of had enough. I was done. I was, again, this was 15 years ago. I wasn't quite as patient as I am now. And the guy said, well, I guess nobody wants to try. And I was like, oh, you know what? I raised my hand. I was like, I'll take it. I'll try it. I don't know if it'll work or not, but I'll try it. The thing is the one opening that I saw was the fact that it was predictable. He expected me to reach out for the knife, and he expected that he was going to do his defenses.
Right.
My response was simply, I kicked him in the shin and just open hand slapped him in the ear. That was it.
Yep.
He dropped the knife by himself, picked it up and put it in my pocket and said, I guess I won.
Right.
And of course, everyone's laughing and they're pointing
Yep.
it out and they're, hey, you know, and so now all of a sudden he's real humble. And I'm not saying that because I'm trying to make myself seem like anything. That's not it at all. The reason why I'm pointing that out is because the situation that he created in his own mind was someone is going to try to reach for my weapon. I'm going to use all of these techniques that I'm comfortable with
Right.
to make it so that they cannot. What he
Right.
didn't think of was, I'm not reaching for the knife at all. You've got it way back there, but you've got your foot right in front of me. I'm going to kick you in the shin. It just so happened he bent over, and I don't know why, but I just open hand slapped him in the ear. It just seemed like a good idea.
Yeah. And zero martial arts. I mean, like,
No.
I mean, right? There's no martial arts in that at all. That's
No, not at all. I swear to you, that's like a schoolyard move that
total
ended
schoolyard
up working.
move. Yep. So I mean,
and that's the idea. What really works at a certain point, your high level skills, your high level techniques will actually be counterproductive to what outcome you're trying to do. Sometimes the answer really is something super simple.
Yeah.
And we have to know that we're not above that.
Yeah.
It's not that the basics are taught first because the basics are, oh, you have to learn this because, you know, you right now we're trying to build you up. It really is, at least in what we do, the basics is like the foundation of the house. Without those things, nothing else is going to work.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny. With the school we go to, like you talk about basics, okay? We drill every class. We do warm ups, and part of those warm ups is shrimping. I know you know what shrimping is, okay?
Absolutely.
How many times now, recently, especially, has John Barrows is my coach, and he'll look at us and go, you know, all those shrimps we do at the beginning of class. There's a reason we do those. You know, like. Why aren't you applying this stuff? Like, there's a reason why this is fundamental. You're doing all this other stuff here that I don't know where you're getting that from because I never taught it to you, kind of thing. And but I've taught you. Why aren't you shrimping? That's what you're supposed to do here, kind of thing. And those fundamentals, once you get them, they're not hard to obtain. But it's like 80% of it is in that first 10% of knowledge.
It is.
It's crazy.
Everything else is just what to do after the fact.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
up to including kick him in the shin, slap him in the ear. You know?
Yeah, I swear that was one of those moments where I just had to laugh at myself in the car. It's like, really? That's what I went for?
Yeah.
Well, whatever, it worked.
If it works, it works.
That's it. And that's something where when we formed KRM Tactical to have these different modular programs, the idea was constantly going back to that. It was, okay, can we simplify? Are we just adding more because we want to have more?
Right.
Because the idea is, can I train both a soccer mom and a military specialist with this program?
Yeah.
And really the only difference would be is the fundamentals are kind of the same. It's just, what do you do after that?
Yep.
That's what changes. If we got an expert in the room, oh man, can we start to play? He's like, okay, now that we're here, let's play a little.
Yeah.
But if we've got a soccer mom, we just stop there.
Right. Yeah, right. You gotta know your audience, right?
That's a big part of it.
Yeah.
You see these guys, okay, I'm going to show you this move, that move, that move, that move. You lost them like 3 moves ago, and you're still going.
You know, it's funny. I don't know if you follow him or not, but that guy, Master Ken Amaradote.
Oh, yes. Hilarious guy.
He's so on he's just a little off of the truth, right? That's what makes it so
Right,
funny,
right.
because of the craziness of, like you say, the kick him in the groin. You got to re-stomp that groin, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
But it's like,
Yes.
when you really get broken down, you get down into the weeds of an actual hand-to-hand combat situation. He's really close to being right on the money there, but he's just taking the piss
Right.
of it, right? He's just making fun of it. But that's sort of there's a truth in that.
Yeah.
If you wanna know how to react in real life situations, you got to drill real life situations. That's
Yes.
the military trains as they fight, right? There's a reason for that. It works.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because one of the things that we try to do, or especially in training, and this is not even, it is in our programs in KRM, but it's also in the martial art that I study, and it's just kind of how I was raised to train, and it's just part of my thinking. If we're going to do something as simple as a jab, any striker should know the jab, right? So from there, it's not a matter of, okay, what's next? Because
Right.
that's what most people will do. Like, great, I got the jab. What's next? No. Okay, so let's put the jab in as many different scenarios as we can think of. And how do we apply it effectively to those scenarios? So we've got one tool that's an answer to 500 different scenarios. Then guess what? I'm probably really comfortable using that in pretty much any scenario.
Right.
And so now I've developed the jab to be a useful thing.
Right.
So now here's the trick. Could I extend my fingers and now use that as an eye jab? Can I do those same 500 scenarios and
Sure.
now it's a one strike ender?
Yep.
Can I do the same thing now using a pen in my hand as a stabbing tool, or a knife or something like that?
Right.
So this is kind of the mentality. It's not about doing more with more toys. It's really about getting more done with less.
Yeah. And seeing the possibility of it too, because most people don't even think about this stuff at all. But you guys take that time to sort of look through that possibility of what ifs. Well, what if I did this? What if you did this way? What would be the liability?
Right. That's a big thing. One of the main things with our programs is we want to make sure that we address the ethics behind what we're doing. If I need to escalate to lethal force, I have the ability to do so without having to change gears too much.
Right.
But it's pretty much the same movement. It's just a matter of targeting.
Right.
And that's what makes it such an easy transition. But we do give ourselves that ability to either escalate or to stay behind a certain level of implementation for the sake of, the reality is you can't go over and say, oh my God, I got into a self-defense situation. So, okay, sir, why did you stab them 65 times? Well,
Right.
At a certain point, it's excessive. No matter what, it's excessive.
It's true. I reloaded 6 times,
Yeah,
right? Okay, wait a minute.
So let me get this straight. You walk around with 3 clips and decided you need to empty out all 3 clips.
Right.
You even changed magazines in between so that you can empty out the gun again, and didn't think maybe at some point you had the opportunity to run away.
Yeah. That's right.
You're going to jail at that point.
I think it was Joe Biden said one time, he said someone asked him about cheating on his wife, and he said, the last thing I remember if I ever cheated on my wife would be her standing over my bleeding body asking me how I reload this damn thing.
That is great. Never heard that one.
So, hey, man, I've had you on the line here for about an hour and a half. I know you've talked me through a scratchy throat, and it sounds like you got people coming home, so I don't want to tie you up for too much longer, but I would love to have you come back on, too, and maybe sit on a panel and do some discussions and stuff, possibly with some other people, because, man, I really like what you resonate with, and I really dig what you're on about and the way you guys sort of structure your school and everything, so... it would be, I guess I'd just like to have you back on sometime to kind of further these discussions if you're into it.
Yeah, of course. I would love to.
Well, so you got anything that you need to talk about specifically or plug specifically before I wrap you up here?
All right. Well, if I got an opportunity to do some plugs,
absolutely.
As far as KRM, if you go to KRM-Tactical.com, We have all the information for our programs there, and you can check our events. I've got one of our programs, the DART program, is going to be in Pittsburgh. It's actually next weekend. So if you guys want to come out and check us out there, feel free to check the link on there. And then in November, the weekend of 17th and 18th, I'm doing the women's program in Atlanta on November 17th and 18th. So although it's the women's program, this one is actually a certification. The modular programs are a certification course. So we've got people who also run martial arts schools that want a good woman's self-defense type of program. So they're going so that they can get certified so that they can offer the program as well.
Train the trainer kind of thing.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, very good, man. Well, look, man, again, I appreciate you spending the time with me today, especially on a weekend. I like that you cut out an hour and a half for me. Folks, thanks for listening. We appreciate all the likes and shares out there. Check us out at www.noshitcast.com, and we'll catch you all next time. Bye, Sickles.
Bye.
That's it. So that's